What is the true cost of greed? Not the kind of greed that announces itself loudly, the kind you can see coming from a distance, the flashy, obvious variety that most people recognize and guard against. I'm talking about the quiet kind, the greed that lives inside someone for years, maybe decades, invisible behind a smile and a shared life and 20 years of ordinary mornings. The kind that sits dormant, patient, waiting for the right moment to reveal what a person is actually made of. Because here is something I have come to believe after hearing stories like the one I'm about to tell you. Money doesn't change people, it reveals them. It removes the daily pressure of ordinary life that keeps certain impulses in check. And in the sudden absence of that pressure, you see, sometimes for the first time, exactly who you have been living with all along. Today I want to tell you the story of Sarah and Mark. 20 years of marriage, a shared life built from scratch in California, through lean years and hard years, and the slow, patient accumulation of something that felt, from the outside and from the inside, like a real partnership. And then one lottery ticket. And then the revelation of a character that Sarah had never fully seen, delivered in the most cold-blooded way imaginable. And then justice. The kind that doesn't arrive slowly or ambiguously, but arrives complete and absolute and in front of an entire courtroom, wielded by a judge who had, by all accounts, seen enough. But we have to begin at the beginning. We have to begin with Sarah. Sarah had met Mark in their mid-20s, when both of them were working entry-level jobs in the Sacramento area, and sharing the specific financial anxiety of young people who are building something from nothing, and are not entirely sure it will hold. She was a bookkeeper for a small construction company. He was in sales. They were not wealthy. They were not even comfortable. Not at first. Not for a long time. What they were, or what she believed they were, was committed to each other and to the project of building a life together through whatever it took. She was the kind of partner that people describe, when they describe her, with the same cluster of words. Steady, dependable, the one who held things together when they were difficult. When Mark lost his first sales job in their third year of marriage, it was Sarah who covered the bills without complaint while he found his footing. When his mother became ill and required extended care, it was Sarah who managed the logistics, who drove the hours, who coordinated the appointments and the insurance claims and the conversations with doctors, and did all of it while keeping her own work going. When there were decisions to make, she made them in partnership. When there were problems to solve, she solved them alongside him. She was not a passive person. She was an active, contributing, fully present partner in a marriage she believed was mutual. Mark was charming. This is important to understand about him, because charm of a certain kind is its own form of concealment. He was good company. He was funny in the easy, crowd-pleasing way that makes someone popular at parties and well-liked at work. He had a quality of seeming enthusiastic about the people around him that made those people feel, in his presence, appreciated and seen. Sarah had loved him for this. She had loved the version of him that she had access to, the warm, funny, seemingly generous person who showed up for the visible parts of their life together. What she did not have access to, and what she would only understand in full after the lottery ticket, was what existed underneath that warmth. The private calculation. The persistent, low-grade resentment that had apparently been building in Mark for years, a feeling that he was not getting what he deserved, that his life had not matched his expectations, that the ordinary, decent life he had built with Sarah was somehow a constraint rather than an achievement. He had never said any of this out loud. Not to Sarah, possibly not to anyone, but it was there. It would announce itself, eventually, in the manner of hidden things, suddenly and completely, and with a clarity that made retrospect feel like an entirely different story than the one she had believed she was living. They were in their mid-40s when this story begins in earnest. The children, if they had had any, would have been grown. The house in the suburbs of Sacramento was paid off more than halfway. The savings account was modest but present. By the standards of what they had started with, they had done well. Not spectacularly, but genuinely, solidly well. 20 years of two people working in the same direction. Mark bought the lottery ticket on a Tuesday in March. He bought it at a gas station, the way people buy lottery tickets. Not with any particular expectation, not as part of a strategy, just on the casual impulse that sends millions of ordinary people to convenience store counters every week with $1 and a brief, harmless fantasy. He scratched it in his car in the parking lot, and the numbers matched. $3 million. Sit with that number for a moment, not in the abstract, not as a statistic, but in the specific context of what it meant to a man in his mid-40s who had spent 2 decades in a life he had apparently come to experience as a disappointment. $3 million is freedom, in that particular American sense of the word. It is the end of the alarm clock and the commute and the performance review, the end of every ordinary obligation that structures a life, and sometimes, depending on who you are, feels like it is suffocating it. $3 million, arriving suddenly and completely without warning, is a before and after line in a person's life. Mark did not tell Sarah. Let that settle for a moment. His wife of 20 years, the woman who had covered the bills when he lost his job, who had managed his mother's medical care, who had been, by every available account, a genuine and committed partner. He scratched that ticket, understood what he was looking at, and his first instinct, his immediate, unmediated, before any reflection response, was not to call her. It was to think about how to keep it from her. He acted quickly. Within 48 hours of discovering the win, he had opened a post office box under his name at a facility on the other side of the city, not a neighborhood either of them frequented. He had opened a new bank account at a financial institution he and Sarah had never used. He had contacted the California Lottery Commission and arranged for the winnings to be dispersed to this new account, with all correspondence directed to the new post office box. He was methodical about it. Whatever else you want to say about Mark, and there is not much that is charitable to say, he was not careless in the execution. He had thought it through. He had identified the points at which the plan could fail and had addressed them. The post office box meant nothing would arrive at the house. The new bank account meant there would be nothing to see on any statement Sarah had access to. The Lottery Commission had clear instructions. The money, to all visible appearances, did not exist. Then he went home. He packed a bag, and he sat Sarah down and told her that he didn't love her anymore and he wanted a divorce. Have you ever tried to imagine what it is like to receive that sentence from a person you have been married to for 20 years? Not the dramatic version, not the version that comes after a period of visible tension and acknowledged problems, and the mutual recognition that something has broken. The other version, the version where nothing seemed wrong, where the previous morning was an ordinary morning, where there was no precipitating fight or acknowledged distance or warning of any kind, and then someone who has shared your life for 2 decades sits across from you and says those words in the flat, decisive tone of someone who has already made up their mind. Sarah was devastated. This is not a sufficient word for what she experienced in the days and weeks that followed, but it is the one available to us. She did not understand it. She reviewed the previous months, the previous years, looking for what she had missed, what she had failed to see, what had been wrong that she had not recognized as wrong. She spoke to friends who were as bewildered as she was. She spoke to a therapist who helped her understand that the absence of an explicable reason was not evidence that she had failed. But this understanding lived in her mind rather than in her chest, where the confusion and the grief had taken up residence and showed no immediate sign of moving. The divorce proceedings were bitter in the specific way that proceedings become bitter when one party is cold and detached, and the other is still in the middle of something that feels, from the inside, incomprehensible. Mark's attorney was efficient and brisk. Mark himself was, by Sarah's account and the account of people who observed the proceedings, entirely unmoved by the emotional reality of what was happening. Not hostile exactly, but absent in a way that was its own kind of cruelty. He wanted to dissolve the marriage quickly and cleanly. He was cooperative on the financial disclosures, disclosing assets he and Sarah jointly held with apparent completeness. He disclosed nothing about the lottery winnings because, as far as his paperwork was concerned, the lottery winnings did not exist. The California Lottery Commission made a mistake. It was the kind of mistake that large institutions make occasionally, and almost never with meaningful consequence. A data entry error, a transposed digit in the address, a letter that was meant to go to a post office box on the other side of the city, and was instead routed to a house in the Sacramento suburbs. It happened 3 weeks after Mark had moved out. The envelope arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. It was addressed to Mark, which was not unusual. Plenty of his mail still came to the house during the transition period. Sarah, who was managing the household correspondence in the process of untangling a shared life, opened it without particular attention, the way you open mail that is functionally yours to deal with, even if it carries another name. It was a document from the California Lottery Commission. It was a tax form. It itemized a disbursement of $3 million made in March. Sarah read it once. She put it down on the kitchen table. She picked it up and read it again. The dates were there. The amount was there. The timing was precise and unambiguous. The ticket had been won, the disbursement had been requested, and the arrangements had been made during the days immediately before Mark had come home, packed his bag, and told her he no longer loved her. She had not left him because the marriage had grown stale, and he had finally found the courage to end it. He had not looked at their life together and made a sad but genuine assessment that something was irrevocably broken. He had won $3 million and decided that she was no longer necessary, and he had executed his exit with the methodical efficiency of someone who had been thinking about it for longer than the 48 hours he'd had to prepare. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then she called her divorce attorney. The attorney's name was Patricia Chen. She had been practicing family law in California for over 2 decades, which means she had heard a great many things and had developed, over those years, a certain professional equanimity in the face of human behavior at its most self-interested. She listened to Sarah describe what the letter contained. She asked several precise questions. She asked Sarah to bring the letter to her office the following morning and not to discuss its contents with anyone in the interim. When Sarah arrived the next morning and placed the letter on Patricia Chen's desk, the attorney read it carefully. Then she set it down with the specific stillness of someone who is identifying, in real time, exactly what they are looking at. What Mark had done was not merely selfish or ethically indefensible. It was, in the precise legal sense of the word, fraud. Lottery winnings acquired during a marriage are, under California's community property law, marital assets. They belong equally to both spouses, regardless of whose name is on the ticket, regardless of whose hands held the scratch-off, regardless of any private conviction about who deserved what. The law does not care about Mark's feelings about his marriage, or his sense that he had outgrown it, or his belief that he had earned something that Sarah had not. The law cares about what is marital property, and $3 million won during a 20-year marriage is, without ambiguity or exception, marital property. Mark had knowingly concealed marital assets in the course of divorce proceedings. He had opened a secret account. He had redirected correspondence to prevent discovery. He had submitted financial disclosures that omitted the single most significant asset in the marital estate. Every one of these actions was documentable, and every one of them constituted deliberate, premeditated fraud upon the court. Patricia Chen filed an emergency motion within 48 hours. The hearing was scheduled within 2 weeks, which in family court terms is the legal equivalent of immediate. Mark's attorney, when informed of the basis for the emergency filing, requested an urgent conference with his client. The conference, by accounts that reached Patricia Chen's office through channels that lawyers have and use, did not go well for Mark. His attorney is reported to have used the word catastrophic, which is not a word that attorneys deploy casually. Mark arrived in court with the specific pallor of a man who has understood, in the days since the letter arrived at the wrong address, that the plan he had executed with such careful efficiency has come apart at a point he had not anticipated. He had thought about the post office box and the new bank account and the redirected correspondence. He had not thought about data entry errors. He had not built his plan to account for the possibility that a large state institution would mistype an address and send a tax document to the wrong place. He had planned for everything he could control, and the thing that had undone him was the one thing he could not. The courtroom was not empty. These things never are entirely. There are always other attorneys present, other parties waiting for their own matters, clerks and court staff, and the various administrative presences that populate a working courtroom. There were enough people in the room to constitute an audience, which matters to this story because what Mark experienced that day, he experienced publicly, in the presence of witnesses, in a room where there was no version of the outcome that remained private. The judge had read the motion and the supporting documents before the hearing began. This was apparent from the first moments of the proceeding, before anyone had said anything substantive, from the quality of the attention the judge brought to Mark when he entered the room. Judges who have presided over family court for any significant length of time have seen a great deal of human behavior. They are not, as a rule, easily shocked. The particular expression on this judge's face, as described by multiple people who were present, was not shock. It was something closer to the weary, concentrated disgust of someone who has seen this general category of behavior before and has not become more tolerant of it through repeated exposure. The proceedings were not lengthy. The documentation was complete, the timeline was documented, the post office box established 2 days after the ticket was scratched, the new bank account established the same week. The Lottery Commission's records, which showed the disbursement request and the correspondence redirection. The financial disclosure Mark had filed, which contained no reference to any of it. Patricia Chen presented each element with the efficient, unhurried precision of someone who knows the case is already won and is simply building the record properly. Mark's attorney argued what could be argued, which was not very much. He suggested that Mark had intended to disclose the assets at a later stage of proceedings. He suggested that the timing, while admittedly problematic in appearance, did not necessarily establish deliberate concealment. The judge listened to these arguments with the specific quality of attention that indicates a conclusion has already been reached, and what follows is procedural. When the judge spoke, the courtroom was quiet. California law, the judge explained, grants the court significant discretion in cases of deliberate asset concealment during divorce proceedings. The law exists because the integrity of the disclosure process is foundational. Without the confidence that both parties are presenting their financial reality honestly, the entire system of equitable distribution collapses. The sanctions available to the court in cases of fraud upon the court are not merely corrective, they are punitive. They are designed to do more than simply restore what was concealed. They are designed to send a message about what this court will and will not tolerate. The judge awarded Sarah 100% of the $3 million lottery winnings. Not half, 100%. Every dollar that Mark had won, that he had redirected and concealed and built an infrastructure to protect from the woman he had married, was awarded in its entirety to that woman. Imagine the specific quality of that silence in the courtroom. Mark at his table, next to his attorney, who had stopped writing notes. The number being stated out loud, $3 million. And the direction of it being stated with equal clarity, to Sarah, all of it, as a sanction for the deliberate and premeditated fraud that had been perpetrated upon the court and upon a spouse of 20 years. Sarah has described the moment in terms that I find, of all the things she has said about this experience, the most honest and the most human. She said she did not feel triumphant, not in the immediate moment, not in the way you might expect from someone who has just been handed $3 million by a judge in a courtroom. What she felt, she said, was something quieter and more complicated than triumph. She felt the specific relief of confirmation, the relief of having the thing she knew to be true acknowledged by a system with the authority to acknowledge it. She had known what Mark had done. She had sat with the knowledge of it for weeks, in the kitchen of the house they had shared, and the knowing without the acknowledgement had been its own kind of weight. When the judge spoke the words and the gavel came down, that weight lifted. What replaced it was not triumph. It was clarity. Mark walked out of that courtroom with the marriage dissolved, the lottery winnings gone, the legal fees for the proceedings added to an account that was now empty, and the knowledge that everyone in that room, and through the various channels by which these stories travel, a great many people beyond that room, knew exactly what he had done and how completely it had failed. He had calculated precisely. He had planned carefully. He had identified the risks and addressed them and moved the money and redirected the mail and filed the paperwork and packed the bag and told the woman who had covered his bills and managed his mother's medical care and been, for 20 years, a genuine and committed partner, that he didn't love her anymore. He had done all of it correctly, and a data entry error at a state lottery office had undone all of it. Because the one variable he had not planned for was the possibility that the universe, or the particular lottery commission employee who mistyped an address on a Wednesday afternoon, was paying attention. There is something I want to say about Sarah before I close. The money mattered. I am not going to pretend it didn't, because financial security after the end of a 20-year marriage matters enormously. And the difference between leaving that courtroom with nothing and leaving it with $3 million is a difference that shapes the rest of a life in real and concrete ways. The money mattered. But I do not think the money is the point of this story. The point of this story is the letter on the kitchen table. The moment when Sarah read the dates and understood the sequence of events and had, for the first time since Mark had packed his bag, a complete and accurate picture of what had actually happened to her. The grief she had been carrying, the confusion, the self-examination, the months of trying to understand what she had missed and how she had failed to see what was wrong, that grief was based on a story that was not true. The true story was simpler and more brutal, and in its own terrible way, more manageable. He had left because he had won money and did not want to share it. There was nothing she had failed to understand. There was nothing broken in her that she had not seen. He had simply done a thing that revealed, with complete finality, exactly who he was. And she had been married, it turns out, not to the man she thought she knew, but to someone who had been waiting, for 20 years, for a reason to leave that was large enough to make leaving feel worth it. $3 million was large enough. What he had not calculated, what people who plan with that particular cold efficiency almost never calculate, is that other people are also paying attention, that the person you are moving pieces around on the board is not a piece. That the woman sitting at the kitchen table on a Wednesday afternoon opening the mail is not an obstacle in a plan. She is a person with an attorney and a courtroom and 20 years of being exactly who she said she was. And she is, it will turn out, a great deal more than anyone who underestimated her had any reason to expect. Greed has a cost. Not always, not reliably, not in the clean and satisfying way that stories like this one suggest it always does, but sometimes. Sometimes the envelope goes to the wrong address, and the woman at the kitchen table reads the dates, and everything that was carefully hidden becomes completely visible. And the judge in the courtroom has seen enough, and the gavel comes down. And the person who was supposed to lose walks away with everything.